Hey guys, and welcome to this video on Pluto in the 7th house. I'm Cassandra, the Saffron Sage, helping you use astrology to evolve. And today we're talking about Pluto, what it means when Pluto, the planet of transformation, is in the 7th house of partnerships. So in this video, first we'll talk about Pluto, the mythology, what it means. Then we'll get into the meaning of Pluto, the planet. We'll talk about the nature of the 7th house, and then what it means if you have Pluto, that planet of transformation, in the 7th house. So let's get right into the video. We're starting with the significance of Pluto in terms of the mythology, the origins of, the meaning of this mythical archetype, if you will. So Pluto, when I was doing research on this, the main story that popped up over and over is the story of Persephone. So the story goes, Pluto kidnapped Persephone, took her to the underworld to be his wife. She unknowingly ate some pomegranate seeds while she was in the underworld. Her mother, Ceres, or Demeter, got upset and was, quite upset that her daughter went missing and tried to get her back. And then Pluto had to make this deal where he would let her go, but not before he got her to eat these pomegranate seeds. And that is what sort of sealed her fate to have to come back to him. So for every seed she ate, she had to stay in the underworld for a certain amount of time each year. So then he had to let her go. And now she goes with Pluto half the year as queen of the underworld, and with her mother half the year. And that's when we have spring, is when Persephone is in, above ground, and her mother Ceres, who nurtures all the crops, the harvest and everything, is doing her job. And when her daughter's gone for half the year, that is when we have winter. So other details about this story are that one is that some legends say that Persephone went with him willingly. And really the thing to know about this story is it's not supposed to be really a tale of a poor damsel in distress who got kidnapped and now that sealed her fate. There is a power and empowerment in this story, which is that not just she goes to the underworld, but that she becomes queen of the underworld. So this myth is really a metaphor for becoming the ruler of our subconscious mind. And they say heaven and hell are in the mind. And that's kind of one of the deeper significances of this story. It is a story of maturity. And no matter how old we are, we simply cannot grow up until we have faced the demons of our own subconscious mind. That is Pluto energy. And when we've done that, wherever we felt the most powerless is where we have the potential to be the most powerful. So Pluto's identity was taken from the Greek deity Hades and combined with Pluton. So Pluton, aka Dispater, had power over the underworld and mineral wealth. And, that underworld was known as that resting place for departed souls. Other little details here, as far as the family tree goes, Saturn was Pluto's dad. Pluto was brothers with Poseidon and Jupiter. And his sisters were Ceres, Juno, and Vesta. So this means that Persephone was his niece. One part of the story that I didn't see anywhere else, I found this on mythopedia.com, was that Cupid shot a dart at Pluto because he didn't want him to be lonely. And so this is how he fell in love with Persephone. And I think this myth really does sort of highlight how when someone Plutonic loves you, they will kidnap you. And people with Pluto placements know what I'm talking about. It's really like, I love you so much, I want to own you and control you. And I'm not saying that's good when it's out of balance, but just that is part of this archetype, really. So on now to Pluto in terms of the planet. Pluto, in terms of the sign that it falls under, is going to showcase generational themes because it stays in a sign roughly 14 to 30 years. So whatever time you were born, that generation, you're going to have the same Pluto as all the other people in that same generation. Pluto by sign is going to highlight generational themes because Pluto stays in a sign for so long, 14 to 30 years, that people with the same Pluto by sign, everyone born in that very long period where Pluto is in that sign, they're going to have the same Pluto. So this is not a personal placement. Where it gets personal is where you have Pluto by house. And wherever you have Pluto by house, this is where you have the most potential to rise, to be empowered, but it's also usually where you're also going to experience the most powerlessness until you learn how to basically own that house, that area of life. Every Pluto has a polarity point, and this is something Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about in his book Pluto. And that is that whatever house you have Pluto in, house and sign, the polarity point is the opposite. So if you have Pluto at 2 degrees of Taurus, then no one has that. So if you have Pluto at 2 degrees of Scorpio, then your polarity point is going to be 2 degrees of Taurus, the exact opposite in the zodiac. And the polarity point is how you evolve. So oftentimes, this is going to be, Pluto is going to be a comfort zone, something we moved through our past lives doing. It's almost like an evolutionary survival skill. And then the opposite point, that's going to be less comfortable, but we're going to get more rewards if we allow that energy to move through us, if we work toward that energy, embody those themes of that sign and house. So now the meaning of the 7th house. The 7th house in astrology is opposite the 1st house. It is an angular house. The angular houses are the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th. And these houses are said to be more significant as the angles in the chart are very important places. Now, the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th, the angular houses, planets in those houses are stronger. So if you have Pluto in the 7th house, automatically Pluto is going to be stronger. That doesn't mean better. Stronger means it will have more of an effect on your life. If it's, a messed up planet and it's in your 7th house, then it'll be a stronger, messed up area of life. Either way, it's more powerful. So now let's talk about this 7th house. The 7th house is the house of partnership, the house of relationships. It is opposite the 1st house. So it really does indicate how we respond to the other, how we compromise, how we are in relationships, what kind of themes we're going to see in the partners we have, whether it be significant others or even close friendships can go in that 7th house, because the 1st house being like our own self, our own identity, that 7th house being where we merge with other people, how we do so, and how our own identity and other areas of life are shaped because of that. Things that fall in the 7th house are definitely our intimate relationships, our marriages, the kinds of people that we date, possibly what that dating life is like based on that sign and the planets in there. It also can show us, again, our significant friendships, people we get close to, the kind of people we normally attract, and the kind of experiences we normally have in relationships. The 7th house can even be considered kind of a shadow, because that descendant begins that 7th house. That's the angle there. And when the sun sets there, this is like, the light goes away. So this is an area of life where until we learn how to look at it and face it and see it, there can be a sense of shadow work that needs to be done to really see this area of life clearly, because again, it's where the sun sets. So now let's move on to the meaning of Pluto in the 7th house. Pluto in the 7th house is almost going to guarantee that there's some intensity to your love life, intensity to your relationships. Now that intensity can show up in many different ways, but oftentimes the relationships that you have this is more of a past life lesson for you. Whereas for all of us, our relationships matter a lot, but for Pluto 7th housers, there are bigger karmic lessons to be learned when it comes to how you relate with other people. Having Pluto here means that your soul has been learning and has been focused on understanding the needs of others. And so there's a lot of energy for Pluto in the 7th house people on what they need in relationships from other people, what other people in relationships need from them. And the word need does come up, because where we have Pluto is oftentimes where we feel powerless until we learn how to own that area of life. And the powerlessness that comes for Pluto in the 7th house people usually shows up in themes of dominance or submission in relationships. Now, for some people, they're just going to be submissive and they're going to attract more dominant partners. And I'm talking about in like life decisions and stuff, where they'll feel powerless. They attract partners who are more powerful. And then the challenging dynamics that ensue from being with someone you need. Because when you have needs like this, there's always a power struggle. Now, it can go the other way, where the Pluto 7th house person is the dominant one, the powerful one, the one that attracts people who need you. And when that's the case, there is a deeper need to be needed. So in this lifetime, it's about learning how to listen to the needs of others, learning how and when to give in relationships. And oftentimes those learning lessons are going to come from the challenges that come from overgiving, from not giving enough, from giving with strings attached, from having conditional love, from having lovers who love you conditionally and will only give to you when you do certain things. And this is a thing that someone with Pluto in the 7th house could feel like they have experienced, where it's like, I'll love you if you fill in the blank. And that's one of the challenges here for this placement, is to rise above either the need to be that way or the need to attract that kind of a partner. So because of this evolutionary need to understand and listen to other people and relate to the other, there's naturally going to be a lot of that, a lot of listening to what other people need, hearing the different viewpoints, whether this is a significant other or other people. And one of the challenges that a Pluto 7th house person can have is at some point in their life, it's like there's too many needs, there's too much feedback. The feedback of what other people need become this chorus that they can't really navigate very well. There's also a potential here that you could have this really strong, almost identity crisis if you don't have a partner, or have a really, really strong need to almost like become who your partner wants you to be. Define who you are, your self-identity based on that partner. This will be much stronger if you have Scorpio rising, because that's the ruler of identity in the house of relationships. So it's almost like there can be a bit of an identity crisis here for people with Pluto in the 7th. Like you get out of a relationship and you're like, well, now who am I? That kind of thing. Or it can also be really challenging when you have conflicts within a relationship, because it's like if you're defining yourself based on your relationship to that person, well then if they're not okay, you're not okay. Another way this Pluto can show up is a strong need to just always have people around. And again, this can be, Pluto in the 7th house is going to show up in your significant relationships, but also all your relationships. So it's like, again, who am I without other people? I have to always be with someone in order to feel okay. There could possibly be an avoidance of the first house, which is the polarity point. That first house of identity, of being able to be self-directed and self-defined. And so there can be phases of life where Pluto 7th house people feel like they are who their partner wants them to be, or they play roles where the partner's role in their life is so demanding or dominating that they just have to be a certain way. And this is a subconscious need to be controlled so that you don't have to choose who you're going to be. And usually, with Pluto, we don't realize this stuff until some of the crises happen. And some of the crises that can happen are, again, you end a relationship, they end a relationship, and then the identity crisis ensues. Now, for every person, there's a potential for this. But for people with Pluto in the 7th house, these are your evolutionary lessons. Therefore, they're going to be stronger. And you're also going to get more, more is possible for you. More, you can gain more from figuring out who you are without someone else. This does not mean you have to be single, okay? Just saying, it doesn't mean that. It does mean that in order to have happy relationships, you may have a few more intense ones first. It may also mean that the more that you can be self-directed and then have relationships that are in alignment with that, the more that you are learning those evolutionary lessons. Now, this can even show up in a more subtle way for people with Pluto in the 7th, where you attract friends or other people in your life who want your advice. And if that's the case, there's a deeper need to be needed that is at play here. Another thing for Pluto's 7th house is relationship endings. When a relationship ends, there's a karmic tie. For everyone's Pluto, if they don't at some point engage in that polarity point, which for you guys is your identity, knowing who you are, making your own decisions, figuring out where you want to go with your own life, that 7th house Pluto will come along and kind of destroy the relationship. So whereas everyone has that to an extent, people with the seventh house Pluto, that is the unique crisis of their Pluto placement, is that a relationship ends because there was no focus on the own identity. And so if you look back to your relationships, you could possibly see that theme. Now, sometimes it's the other person who ends the relationship. And usually with Pluto in the seventh, there's a feeling of being used. There's a feeling of, you no longer meet my needs, so I'm going to go somewhere else. And again, these dynamics do happen in all relationships, but again, for Pluto's seventh house people, this is a more past life karmic thing. And the thing about Pluto in the seventh usually is when one person leaves the relationship, the other person does not want them to go and has all this unresolved energy, whether it's you initiating the leaving or them. If you stay together, if you stay together and go through these power struggles with someone who, where the need and the dominance, it's not like you're not learning the lesson, neither one of you are learning the lesson. It's almost like there's a forceful removal of the relationship. It almost feels like the hand of fate will come along and remove it. So the lesson for people with Pluto in the seventh house is learning when and how to give, learning how to give without being needed, learning to recognize that deeper subconscious desire to be needed to feel good, and let go of that need and detach a little bit from the need to be needed, so you can see when giving to the person is creating that imbalance, or when being given to is also creating an imbalance. So there's strong themes of control for Pluto seventh house people in relationships. So it's almost like, again, like I love you if you do this, or you love me if you do this. And sort of these feelings like you could go through situations with a partner who's like withholding certain things, and they won't give you what you need unless you do what they want. And it's all these just power dynamics and power struggles showing up. Now, sometimes with Pluto in the seventh house, you will actually intentionally try to give to your partner in a way, but you won't even be giving them the things they want. So what can happen here is you can have partners who won't accept your gifts. They don't like the love language that you use. And what's really going on here is a disconnect between what you think someone needs and what they actually need. So with Pluto in the seventh house, there is sort of going to be a phase of life where you learn your own needs and relationships. And oftentimes the way we learn our needs is by not getting them met. This doesn't mean Pluto seventh house people should stay in those situations, but that most people with Pluto in the seventh house will find that they've been in relationships where their needs weren't met, or the other people's needs weren't met, or needs being met. And one person being able to and not doing it, or withholding, all of those themes can come into play. It's also for seventh house Pluto people about learning not to make someone your idol, learning not to make someone the source of all of your needs and your existence. And again, to learn how to not encourage people to depend on you in a way that doesn't support them. So it's like you give someone advice, they don't follow it, don't listen to it, and then they come back for more advice. So if you're working on learning this lesson, it would be when the person comes back again to recognize that and go, you know what? You asked me for advice on this. So if you haven't done what I said, then, I'm not going to give you any more. And that may sound so much easier said than done, because of that subconscious need. You may not even recognize it. You may just feel like, oh yes, somebody needs me, and not even be conscious of that, not even be aware of that. So it's also about being able to receive in relationships without dependence as well, and having this lesson of being in a relationship because you want to, not because you need to. The evolutionary lesson here, the polarity point being in that first house of identity, life direction, being self-asserted and self-directed, is about doing what you want, learning when to make the decision to do what you want with your life without the feedback of other people. Again, this does not mean you have to be single. It does not mean you can't be in relationships with this Pluto. It does mean that for you, the more that you can focus on kind of deciding what you want and going after it without feedback, the better. It's also about learning how not to try to control the direction of your partner's life, because this is one of the ways that we can get mixed up here. So again, it's about being able to choose people who don't need you and you don't need them. So I feel like someone listening is probably, well, like, if we didn't need each other, why would we be in a relationship? But there is, and that might actually be a symptom of the fact that you're wrapped up in that Pluto, because some people do engage in relationships just because they want to enjoy the presence of the other person. And so if that feels so foreign to you that you're like, this doesn't make sense to me, then it's just something to kind of explore, explore the idea of what it would be like to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't need you. And if that feels so terrifying, like what if they don't need me, then that kind of does indicate that there is something to be looked at here. There is also a lesson here of being able to give to other people and see the results come back to you. That is part of the 7th house, is that when we are honestly, showing up in giving mode to other people, that they naturally want to give back to us when we're giving in the right way and we're giving to the right people. But if you're not giving in the right way and you're not giving to the right people, it could deplete you, and it could also not come back to you. It could be that you're giving and giving and giving, supplying, all this help and support and feedback, but the feedback or the support, if it doesn't feel like it's coming back, then it's about creating the cycle from a place of wholeness, not neediness. On every possible side. So this is kind of the hope, the promise of this placement. So this is kind of the highest potential of Pluto in the 7th, is that you have an insane amount of power when it comes to how you can give and how you can support people. It's just a matter of finding how to use that power for good, just like all of the Plutos, in a self-generating way instead of a self-destructive way, in a relationship-generating way instead of a relationship-destructing way. So know that if you are caught up in the web of this Pluto still, that to the degree that you have experienced powerlessness and pain and struggle in relationships, there is the same level of power to give and connect on the other side of overcoming this evolutionary lesson. Another thing about this Pluto is that you can have very, very powerful business relationships. This placement can translate into tons of really good skills in business because of that power that Pluto brings to managing people, to managing business decisions. Business partnerships fall in that 7th house. So you have power in not just being a partner, but just business skills at all with this placement. And oftentimes that area of life doesn't usually have the same amount of drama as the relationship side, the personal relationship side does. So you can be really wonderful at dealing with the money side of things with Pluto in the 7th house. Once you have really started to and begun to alchemize this placement, you can give the most. You have the power to give people exactly what they need. With this placement, you have the power of being this amazing, positive, regenerative force in other people's lives with this placement. Once you learn that evolutionary lesson of making those decisions without input. It's also about choosing partners who are also powerfully self-directed in their lives as well. This doesn't mean you can't have any level of dependence, as relationships sort of do demand that, but it's about what kind of dependence, right? It's about learning the healthy kind of dependence, learning how to be assertive and collaborative instead of more maybe codependent or dependent. So that is what I have for Pluto in the 7th house. Make sure you join us on Fridays at 6:30 for live readings. I do these on this channel every week, so come check it out. You can come watch, you can come book your own reading, and we do it all live right there. They're super fun. And also stay tuned for my announcement. I'm going to be doing a course on past lives, how to read the past lives in your chart. So if you want info on that, just make sure you're watching for the announcements. I'll be putting out a wait list soon. So watch for that if you want to be one of the first to join. And that is what I have for this video, you guys. I hope that it helped. Make sure you comment below, subscribe, and hit the bell if you want more videos like this. I also do new moon and full moon reports, lots of different other videos on astrology. So thank you all for commenting. You guys, your comments help this channel grow so much. So Thank you to everyone who's been commenting and liking and sharing and everything you guys do. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you all in the next video.